Wrath of Angels. Chapter 2. Scene 1. The Monastery of the Last Watch. On the edge of the ruin storm. Month 5, year 257, the 41st millennium. From the rock came new orders. Excavate the last watch from Caliban's corpse. The monastery had clung to a wedge of planetary crust when the world split apart. Towers shattered, but its bones still whole. It had once been a crucible for the hexagrammaton, where the 6 wings were drilled in reliquary arms and silent wars, where oaths were forged sharper than swords. Now it drifted in void, a spire tilted like a broken tooth, cloisters cracked but intact. The Mechanicum wrapped it in scaffolds and cranes where it hung, rather than risk moving it. Engines bored into stone, the crust groaning as if resenting every cut. Servitors droned canticles as chains bit deep. Some serfs swore the monastery's shadow against the void resembled a skull. A serf named Ivan, clinging to scaffold ropes, whispered to his mate that the stone wept when cut. His mate spat blood from dust-choked lungs and told him to keep swinging the hammer. Overseers in red robes marked every death in cold Binharik, their voices flat as they entered names into slates. Sacrifice noted, machine appeased. Above them, the monastery's silhouette changed day by day. Great ribs of steel speared into stone. Towers tilted further under the strain until brace arms seized them and fixed them upright. From a distance, the whole looked like a reliquary coffin braced in a cage of cranes. Mortal laborers wept when the first arch joined, believing they had chained a saint's bones into the void. Others died under falling blocks, their names etched into fresh liturgies of mortar and blood. Secrecy was absolute. None beyond the inner circle knew what was being made. A Mechanicum overseer, Magos Herodek, kept a tally in both Binharik and blood. 3rd scaffold collapse. 12 lost. Sacrifice noted. Machine appeased. His aides whispered litanies as they transcribed. One servitor caught fire from a plasma spill. The flames guttered blue as though fed by incense. Some swore the stone itself tried to spit the Mechanicum out, groaning like a wounded beast each time cutters bit too deep. The scaffolds sang in the thin air when the void breeze found them. Chains creaked like old bones. When torches guttered, incense smoke crawled in skeins along the carved reliefs of saints and monsters that had once adorned the monastery's cloisters. The red-robed adepts pressed sealant into the stone with gloved thumbs. When they lifted their hands, black oil bled back out, leaving thumbprints like stigmata. Jovan wrote with a stolen stylus on a pilfered slate. Day 47. Stone draws breath when struck. We hear it. We are inside a thing that hates to be moved. He hid the slate in the warm cavity behind a cracked saint's face and returned to work. That night, a gust knocked the scaffold. The saint's shattered eyes watched 7 men fall. In the morning, Herodek signed the page. 7 transferred to the ledger of appeasement. Ash weight measured for mortar. Work gangs rotated every 6 hours until the rotation became a superstition. The 4th shift never finished quietly. Men whispered prayers to the lion and to machines, offered hair, nails, teeth. A woman from the rivet crew snipped off the tip of her braid before each climb and tucked it into a crack in the stone. If the lock of hair was gone when she descended, she told herself the monastery had taken payment in advance and would therefore let her pass again. If it remained, she did not look at it. When a crane's clutch jammed and the drum squealed, a chorus of servitors took up a new cadence, a grinding hymn, while a junior Magos cut his palm with a cog-toothed knife and smeared blood across the gearworks. The clutch released. The drum spun. The junior Magos fainted and was dragged away by hook, leaving a smeared handprint that dried to a darker iron than the brace around it. No one cleaned it. The handprint became a sign, and men tapped it with 2 fingers before crossing the span. At the edge of the works, tarped caskets lay in ranks. The tarps billowed when the ship exhaled, because that is what the men called it now, the exhalation. Cranes shifted, talk shivered down into stone, and the monastery moved as though drawing breath. Settling, the adepts called it. Breathing, the laborers said. Neither dared to argue. A lector tried to forbid the word breathing on pain of lash. The lashmaster died the next day when a pin sheared on a hoist that had never sheared in 30 years. The men stopped saying breathing aloud, but the thought of it pressed in their cheekbones like weather. At meal halts, tins clicked open in unison. Grit sang between teeth. Adepts ate apart. Bowls of curdled nutrient in a circle around a red-robed lector. The lector recited accident liturgies, the way a priest recites births. His voice had the weight of an account that balanced 7 appeased, 12 appeased, 3 appeased. Men learned to keep their mouths shut when a number matched the size of their gang. On the outer scaffold, a boy with a sinner's brand on his wrist, too young for a brand that deep, worked the rivet gun with a pilgrim's patience. When the gun jammed the second time that hour, he pressed his forehead to the cool steel of the brace and whispered, "I know you're still a monastery. I know they're trying to make you more. You don't have to be." The jam cleared with a cough like a swallowed answer. He did not tell anyone. He stopped using the word more. The void around the drifting spire filled with moths of light, welding arcs, so many that some serfs thought they saw constellations returning. Amagos composed a hymn about it in Binhari. The hymn's final stanza refused to compile. He rendered it by hand in iron filings on a deck, sneezed, and the pattern blew away. Later that shift, an unassigned chime rang 3 times from inside a sealed wall. Hierodek's stylus had a knurled grip to steady hands that trembled now and then. He had no tremor before this project. He kept his old handwriting in a pocketbook for comparison. The letters in the new Book of Failures sloped more, as if bending under a wind only he could feel. He tried to correct for it. The wind did not care. In a private margin, he made a note that was not an entry. Sometimes the stone anticipates the cut. The blade slides before it bites. I feel consent and refusal alternating in veins. A pair of adepts quarreled about omens. One counted every 7th link in a chain and chalked it. The other inverted prayer flags when the void's glare shifted from blue to bone white. They wouldn't have called it augury, only procedure. When a load swayed toward the chalked links, the second adept spat on the deck and said, "See? Superstition." The load stopped half a finger's width from the chalk and hung there like a hand thinking. The men did not move until it changed its mind. The red-robed adepts began to wear 2 sets of gloves, one oiled, one dry, and change between them according to micro-rituals. If the chain groaned on the 3rd link from the hook, if the incense pooled towards the eastern brace, if a prayer flag twisted clockwise, a servitor tripped and bled coolant across a relief of a hunt. The coolant ran along the carved bowstring and dripped from the carved arrowhead. The foreman barked to mop it. The men stared instead. The arrowhead's drip rate matched the scaffolding's sway. They named the place the Archer's Leak and avoided it. A week later, a new brace spanned the relief. No one worked beneath it, unless their name had already appeared in the Book of Failures. Those men said the stone could not take them twice. On a rest platform spattered with rust and incense soot, Iovan shared a tin with an older rigger called Mir. Mir had scars on his gums, and the flat calm of a man whose grief had matured into furniture. He pointed with his chin toward a half-set stair that spiraled into darkness and said, "Once a staircase goes down, it never finishes going down. They grow new steps in the dark while we sleep." Iovan laughed until a stone dust mote landed on his tongue. It tasted like cold iron and altar ash. He didn't laugh again. He wrote on his slate, Day 58. The monastery knows stairs. We are the new steps. He crossed it out and wrote instead, Shift weight before the turn. The brace complains if you do not. The spinal road, once paved by penitents' knees, was overlaid with segmented track for crawler cranes. The track rattled, and the rattling settled into a rhythm that the serfs learned without wanting to. 7 beats and a pause. 7 beats and a pause. Someone said it matched a heart. Someone else said the heart had never been human. When the track seized at the pause, men held their breath without meaning to, and only realized it when the rattling resumed and air tumbled ragged back into their lungs. An old bell hung cracked in a cloister arch, its clapper long removed. The Mechanicum planned to smelt it down for plate. Before they could, the bell tolled once in the middle of a shift change. The tone was thin and sour, but it was a tone, and everyone stopped. A rivet gun continued to chatter by itself for a heartbeat, then stuttered into silence. Heiradek wrote nothing about the bell. He underlined the previous entry with excessive force, tearing the page. On the night side of the spire, where void frost furred the stone, a lantern gang cut channels for cabling. The frost sublimed into vapor and fogged their visors. In the fog, Eovan thought he saw footprints that did not belong to his gang. The prints were small, the stride short, like a child's or a pilgrim's on bloodied knees. When he stepped where the prints were, his boot met nothing. Stone translated sideways a finger's width, and he nearly fell. He told no one. He put a rivet in each footprint and told himself it was to keep the cable from wandering. A lector delivered a sermon about the nobility of work. He spoke of how stone remembers the hands that shape it, how iron sings when joined well, how men become better by labor. He then slipped on a string of beads that had fallen from a saint's neck and shattered his jaw on the step below the pulpit. He continued the sermon in wet consonants while the medici wrapped his face. The men listened more closely after that. The first great arch joined above the nave, cramps locking with a teeth gnash of iron. Workers on the lower scaffold, thinking themselves unobserved by God or foreman, kissed the bolts. When the arch settled, a drift of dust fell like blessing. Beneath it, 7 men coughed blood in unison. 6 had known they had the same illness. The 7th had told no one. The dust on his tongue tasted of candle wax and old wine. Around the drifting monastery, long cargo spars extended like ribs to accept the first fit of hull plating. From certain angles, the silhouette resembled a beast caught in a hunter's frame, ribs split and bound. The first plate arrived black and pitted, stamped with a serial older than anyone on the deck. The stamp read as if it had been hammered from the wrong side. The priest who blessed it inverted his aquila without meaning to, and the photograph of the blessing misdeveloped into a white negative where the plate should be. The plate went on anyway, and the rivets held anyway, and the men worked anyway. That was the lesson of the place. Most things held if you ignored what they said about themselves. A rumor ran that the rock had sent a sealed reliquary to be set within the monastery's heart. The crate arrived under 6 seals, borne by servitors who did not turn their heads. The crate passed through the nave, and the men did not look at it, only at the floor before it. When it disappeared into a chamber beneath the altar, the air became warmer. Not much, but enough that the frost retreated from the night side for 1 hour. The hour was written in 3 ledgers: fuel, labor, miracle. Iovan found a saint's finger bone embedded in mortar. It had been railed over and ground to half its length by boots. He prized it free with the tip of his knife and wrapped it in cloth torn from his sleeve. Later, when the tally for his gang came up short by 1 unit of labor, he placed the bone on the step of the stair that never finished going down. In the morning, the bone was gone and the tally balanced. He added 2 lines to his slate. The stone trades. And then beneath, don't trade names. A woman from the sling crew fell and did not strike anything, simply passing through a lattice of chain and brace, as if each were a ghost consenting to her fall. She vanished below the scaffold line. The men on the level beneath stared and said they had not seen her pass. The book recorded her as unrecovered. In the margin, someone wrote a small circle and filled it in. No one claimed the mark. A day later, the circle was gone and a smear of oil remained, shaped like a thumbprint. Near the end of the month, a new cohort of serfs arrived, men and women with the impassive faces of those already indebted for their lives. They spoke a dialect with swallowed consonants and called the monastery the last house. One of them, a stonemason with silver dust in the lines of his knuckles, rested his cheek against the old wall and said, "This was built by people who thought they would live forever." He then set his chisel and cut through that thought with 8 strokes. On the 8th, the wall sighed. The sigh passed through the scaffold and the cranes and the ribs and into the men's teeth. They clenched and tasted iron. The mason spat silver dust and kept cutting, respectful as a butcher. The day the first brace locked the highest tower upright, the wind, if wind can be the movement of heat and pressure in the thick air of a work site bolted to dead rock in vacuum, turned and carried incense toward the east. Flags turned with it, then turned back against it, then held perfectly still. In the stillness, an unassigned prayer began somewhere low and became many voices. It used no words. It sounded like men trying not to drown. When it ended, Hirodek's stylus snapped. He sharpened it with a file and wrote, "Brace set. Tower corrected. Appeasements counted." He did not write. We were heard. At shift end, the laborers knelt in rows on cables and prayed to avoid notice. Not salvation, just that the stone would forget their names. The Mechanicum lectors insisted on a formal dismissal. Men rose by file, made the sign of the cog, touched brow, mouth, heart. Iovan did the motions and added one of his own. 2 fingers tapped against the scaffold strut, the way he had seen a Deathwing knight touch a reliquary in a parade long ago. It felt wrong to borrow a gesture meant for angels. It felt worse not to. The last act before downing tools was always the same. Men turned the pages of the hazard ledgers and weighed them with bolts to keep the wind from moving them. One evening, the ledger's pages would not lie flat. They wrinkled in a slow curl, as if drying in heat, though the air was cool. A scribe swore and pressed his palm down. The page pressed back. He snatched his hand away and found the outline of letters in reverse on his skin. He laughed with more teeth than the joke deserved. He wrapped his hand and wrote the entry with his other. By the time the crawler cranes laid their last segment across the cloister, the monastery was half sarcophagus, half cathedral, half machine. Too many halves for one body, and yet it stood. From certain angles, the spire's shadow looked like a sword with broken wings. From other angles, it looked like a wing with a broken sword. The men learned not to look from angles. Angles told stories. The work needed silence. At the perimeter of the work, under a tarpaulin pinned with welded hooks, 2 adepts argued in whispers about the next phase. One said the rock should not graft stone to ship. The spirits would resent the marriage. The other said the ship would eat the stone and call it its own. Hirodek arrived, heard neither argument, and ordered the tarpaulin raised. Beneath it lay a brace arm, like a cathedral rib, scrollwork etched along its length, hexagrammaton sigils, cog teeth, a sword's wing. The arm was heavier than its tonnage. 4 chains groaned as it rose. The men below felt the weight in their mouths. Iovan thought, "When this sits, we will belong to it," and then corrected himself, "We already do." The first snow of powdered stone fell inside the nave when the arm locked home. It did not drift the way dust should. It seemed to choose the saint's shoulders and settle there like epaulets. The lector began to brush it away with a horsehair whisk and stopped, one hand hovering in the air. He left it. Later, on his way to his bunk, Iovan paused and touched a shoulder and left a fingerprint in the snow. In the morning, the fingerprint was gone. In its place, a small depression shaped like the point of a blade. He did not touch the saints again. The day ended with the long clang of the brass time rod, and the clang hummed through brace and rib and stone and the men's bones until the hum faded into a quiet that was not emptiness but attention. The monastery held itself as a wrestler holds his first breath. The men, uncoached, held theirs with it, and for a moment every chest on every scaffold refused to rise. When at last the air went back into the world, the tarps over the caskets fluttered like tired lungs, and the moth-light welds dimmed, and the candles in the ad hoc chapels hissed and died as if pinched. Iovan climbed down the ladder with hands that could no longer forget their own path. At the bottom, he palmed the crack behind the saint's face, felt the warmth of the slate he had hidden there, and did not take it out. He didn't need to write the last line of the day. It was already written in the ache of the cables and the bruises of the harness and the itch of stone dust at the corner of his eye. The monastery is learning our names. This has been Wrath of Angels. Chapter 2, Scene 1. The Monastery of the Last Watch. Chapter 2, Scene 2 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 2, Scene 2, Reconstruction. Amid the debris of shattered Caliban. Month 7, year 258, the 41st millennium. The work became ritual. Days no longer counted themselves in hours but in failures, and failures were fuel. The book of failures grew fat, its leather swollen with ink, wax, and blood ground into the seams. Each page turned heavy as a millstone, the book's growing ledger. Entry 77. Brace collapsed. 7 serfs crushed. Names recorded. No error admitted. Entry 84. Pump burst. Steam scalded 9. Ash gathered for mortar. Litany sung. Entry 96. Crane snapped. 5 fell into the void. Ropes sang. Nothing recovered. Entry 102. Heart stopped in furnace heat. Alone, sacrificed. Entry 118. Wall would not take weld. 6 adepts broke tools and mines. 1 laughed until throat burst. By the 100th entry, the style had changed. The early neatness was scripture. Later lines were written with a hand trembling from repetition. Margins filled with catechisms, copied like marginal prayers. Pride resists the weld. Pride fractures brace. Pride calls the storm. To persist is devotion. To break is confession. Confession is fuel. Soon the margins became their own scripture, voices echoing each other. Entry 123. Sawdust caught in vent. Fire spread. 8 consumed. Ash remains sieved for mortar. Entry 131. Adept refused to work. Eyes bled. Executed. Blood mixed with primer oil. Entry 134. Bell tolled once without order. 2 fell to knees. 1 did not rise. Entry 140. Wall collapsed without cause. 7 crushed. Limbs recovered. Joints welded into brace. Entry 148. Stained glass pane shattered before installation. Fragments arranged themselves into a wing. Photograph prohibited. Fragments ground for pigment. Entry 152. Cable snapped with no load. 3 flung into nave. Only shadows recovered. Entry 159. Servitor halted without command, spoke once. Leave. Decommissioned immediately. Entry 164. Lector fell from gallery. Spine snapped. Witnesses swore he had been standing still. Entry 170. Fire door sealed without cause. 4 suffocated. Ash jar placed beneath altar. Entry 176. 27 nails rejected by stone, bent into hooks, hung above work gang cots. Entry 181. Choirmaster found with score written in his veins. Notes bled clean, no ink nearby. Entry 187. Frost spread across reliquary wall. Shapes resembled hands. Meltwater collected for analysis. Consumed as libation. Entry 190. Rivet guns all jammed in unison. 7 men beaten to death trying to free them. Tools untouched afterward. Entry 194. A statue's head rotated unbidden to face altar. 3 adepts struck blind. Eyes found intact. Pupils white as ash. No one spoke of the entries aloud anymore. Reading them became like dragging a blade across one's tongue. Thranos. Acolyte. Thranos obsessed. He traced circles across his slates, filling the wax with arcane patterns. His fingernails split from scratching. His voice rasped as though pulled through gravel. It spares the cruel. It takes the kind, he muttered, tallying names of the dead against small favors granted to survivors. He stopped eating with the others, giving rations away to see if generosity would mark him for death. He drank condensation from pipes, licking iron as if tasting the ship's mood. He began to haunt thresholds, ear pressed to hinges, listening. The ship is not asleep, he whispered to anyone who passed. It is waiting for the right name. Serfs avoided him, yet some found him at night by accident, scratching glyphs into stone with chalk stolen from masons. He joined the chalk lines into circles and spoke inside them until his throat bled. One night he told a riveter, "Hide your dead's names. If you remember them, it takes you. Forget them, and it passes." The riveter spat, but later scratched out his wife's name from the tattoo on his arm until it was only a scar. The day Thranos vanished, witnesses swore he walked calmly through a door. The hinges shrieked, the door slammed. When it was forced, nothing was inside. No body, no tool, not even dust. Hierodek tried to record the death. Entry 200. Acolyte Thranos, lost to sealed door. Cause unknown. The stylus snapped. A second stylus dried mid-ink. No mark would take. The line remained blank. In the margin he wrote, "Absence heavier than presence," a subtraction recorded by subtraction itself. The blank page was heavier than any filled one. Men turned past it quickly, the way you avert your eyes from a coffin too small. The cathedral taking shape. Steel stitched to stone like scar tissue. Vaults were cut into Caliban's crust, chambers yawning deep. The great hall rose above it, altar welded to machine core, stained glass columns prismatic and wrong. Light broke into fractured skulls on the floor. Twin staircases curled around statues of Caliban's champions. Brass giants with grins of skull rows on plinths. The ship resisted. Doors slammed with no one near. Bells tolled once at midnight, and no more. Lights flickered in patterns almost regular, enough to look like code, and not enough to be deciphered. When the first stained glass window was seated, an angel weeping into a broken blade, the colors bled down the lead seam. Red pooled on the sill. Blue sank into the stone. An adept measured the drip, wrote it on a slate, and watched the numbers vanish as soon as he finished. He wrote again. They vanished again. On the third attempt, the stylus bled red ink, though it had never been filled with such. He stopped writing. He knelt, Beneath the nave, adepts hammered vault doors shut with chants. Above, masons grouted mortar with ashes saved from dead serfs. Every tool strike echoed as if doubled by unseen hands. Some said the monastery itself was working with them now. Others whispered it was working against them. Either way, it worked. Catechism of failure. Scribes began to recite between shifts. Who bends? The weak bend, and the machine records. Who breaks? The proud break, and the machine devours. What is sacrifice? That which the ship demands, and that which is given gladly are the same. What is pride? The name remembered when it should be forgotten. Even the serfs joined the catechism, mumbling between mouthfuls of gruel. The words were ugly, but they filled the void left by names they dared not speak. The ship pushes back. Once, all the doors of the dormitory slammed together, rattling the frames like teeth. Men sat bolt upright. No one moved until a lector whispered, "It has turned a page." Another night, bells rang in an unbuilt tower. Adepts climbed, found only scaffolds, no metal cast, no clapper to toll. Yet men swore they had heard 3 notes, descending, as if the monastery sighed. Still they worked. Still the ship resisted. Still the book filled. By the 150th entry, no one knew if they were recording failures or prayers. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 2, Scene 2, Reconstruction. Chapter 2, Scene 3 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 2, Scene 3, Awakening. Amid the debris of shattered Caliban. Month 3, Year 259, the 41st millennium. They tried 12 awakenings. Each ended in failure and death. The book of failures grew heavy. The pages turned like blades. And yet they kept trying, because to stop would be to admit the ship wanted to stay a tomb. First awakening. The scald. Engines throbbed. One colossal beat, like a heart startled in sleep. And the coolant maze answered with a bright white sigh. The sigh became a storm. Valves screamed. Sight turned to steam. Skin sloughed from bone in sheets that slid down thigh and shin and pulled at boots with a slap like offal hitting a butcher's table. 50 men boiled where they stood, mouths open to drink air that wasn't there anymore. Along the deck plates, the heat drew oil from the seams, beads of black forming rosaries that rolled toward the drains, as if seeking absolution. One survived, crawling through a sluice that stank of copper and sacrament. His eyes blistered shut like wax. Wrapped later in cloth, hands bandaged to mitts, he pressed his ear to a bulkhead as if to a fevered child and whispered, "Thirsty, aren't you?" A medici pulled him back. He bit the man's wrist without knowing he had teeth left. The book. First attempt. Thermal runaway. 50 appeased. Coolant rights revised. In the margin a hand not Hyrodex wrote. Breathed in, not out. Second awakening. The echo. At ignition cadence the vox chorus opened, and the dead came through as if signal were a gate left ajar. The boarding team lost long ago screamed in present tense. Not we died, but we die. Bolt counts rattled in bursts. Someone prayed their last prayer backward. The sound crawled under the nails. A child's sing-song voice joined, counting up 1, 2, 3, and refused to learn 10. The number hung just out of reach like a ledge over a pit. An adept clamped a wrench to his ear and twisted until cartilage gave with a soft pop. He held the cup of meat in a shaking hand and found the voices clearer. He jammed the flesh into the throat of a speaker grill. It sizzled and smoked, filling the compartment with a smell like breakfast turned wrong. The count went on unfussed. 7, 8, 9, 9, 9. The book. Second attempt. Echo of the dead. Channels purged. Choir replaced. A catechism bloomed below. Do not answer the dead. They remember better than you. Third awakening. The blue. Candles in empty chapels woke by themselves, each wick catching a blue that gave no heat and ate warmth from the room like hunger. Frost formed in the curls of ironwork and on the faces of saints. For an hour, breath smoked in hot mouths, while wax stood upright as if deciding. Then the blue burst. Wax became a metal rain. Drops punched holes through hymnals and stuck quivering in the oak of pews like arrows. A priest staggered out blinded, eyelids fused smooth, hands cooked to bone where he'd tried to shield his eyes. He laughed in hiccups. I saw an ocean, he said, but the ocean had a ceiling. Servitors swept the droplets into pans. Each bead ticked against tin with the exact rhythm of a heartbeat that isn't yours. The book. Third attempt. Blue fire. 1 blinded, 5 burned. Wax treated as alloy. Nota bene in neat Mechanicum hand. Alloy composition non-standard. Tastes of salt. Fourth awakening. The lullaby. It began as a hiss in the pipes, the harmless chatter of steam. Then tune accreted to noise the way barnacles find a hull. A lullaby grew from the hiss, sung in many children's voices, none belonging to anyone aboard. The melody moved like a hand smoothing hair. Men leaned back against bulkheads, as if given permission. They set tools down carefully, reverently, palms open, blades turned inward, the way one sets a child away from the edge of a table. By the penultimate bar, 3 men had hung themselves from gallery chains. A 4th failed. He wept without tears for the rest of the day, throat worked raw by a sob that refused to arrive. When silence returned, the pipes bled a sugar film. Ants nowhere aboard walked a line to it in a dream and died there in neat rows. The book. 4th attempt. Unauthorized hymn. 3 self-offered. Pipes bled sugar. In the gutter a small hand wrote, "We have no children." An underlined no until the paper tore. 5th awakening. The denial. 1,000 data slates woke at once and wrote no in exact unison, letter height calibrated like soldiers in a parade. The word leapt into eyes. Men blinked and found it etched on eyelids, on walls, on the fine enamel of their own teeth. Heat followed ink. Slates burst into flame without smoke, then made smoke anyway. Curlicues that braided themselves into wings. The wings beat once and unmade. A priest scraped his tongue along deckplate patterning until the rough took the taste buds away. He wrote no in the blood that followed and smiled like a man hearing good news. The mark dried mirror bright and reflected the ceiling of the ship as if water lay there above them, held by nothing. The book. 5th attempt. Denial manifested. Slates destroyed. Noise unrecorded. Survivor's note appended later by a different quill. It wasn't no. It was a name. The mouth refuses it. 6th awakening. The glass song. Chandeliers lit with frostlight. Crystals chimed to one another like polite knives. Then they shattered without cutting anyone. Shards hung in the air, a hairbreadth too long, ringing, each note precise as a star's pulse. The choirmaster wrote on his palm in ink, transcribing pitches as they fell. The ink bled into his skin, black veins running from knuckle to wrist. He continued until the last high sliver chimed and dropped. A junior adept, lips blue with cold, whispered that the notes spelled a word. 5 more heard 5 more words and none matched. One knelt, wrote his word into the book's margin in a fine engineer's script. The letters sank through parchment, through desk, through deck, a vertical inscription descending like a needle through cloth. Weeks later, faint rust on a girder 30 decks down formed the same letters crookedly, as if written left-handed by a tired god. The book, 6th attempt, frost looming, harm avoided, auditory pattern unresolved, Mechanicum addendum, containment unnecessary, handwritten human addendum below, containment impossible, 7th awakening. The name. The engines cleared their throat, and a man became punctuation in a sentence made of steel. He flew into a bulkhead at an angle that disagreed with the geometry of death, denting metal with a shoulder blade, and most of his history. He lived like a jar full of cracked glass, each breath a gentle rattle. He spoke only the ship's name, over and over, a word that undid itself as you looked at it. The medici flinched without knowing why. When he died, the sound left the compartment like a flock startled into dark. No one could recall the syllables a moment later. The Auspex log recorded 6 seconds of broadband hiss, exactly shaped like a gap between words. The book, 7th attempt, kinetic objection, 1 crushed yet living, language event non-retentive, margin, we are not permitted to know what we serve, 8th awakening, the pressure. Silence arrived not as absence, but as presence, a thickening where sound should have been. Men opened mouths and found nothing came or went. Lungs moved like fists punching water. Pressure deepened until vision whitened at the edges. The world narrowed to the fact of a heartbeat that might or might not belong to you. One serf's heart decided. It stopped. He slumped, smiling like a child in a cradle. Others stood with tears on faces they could not feel, bodies convinced they were drowning in a sea of compressions. When sound returned, clang of chain, cough of torch, someone swearing because he still could. Men laughed, ugly and grateful for the scrape of the world against itself. The book, 8th attempt, perfect silence. One heart stilled, no echo registered. A square of black ink appeared on the page by itself by morning and would not be scraped away. 9th awakening. The script. Paint blistered along corridor seams, bubbles fattening, then splitting to reveal lines like letters glimpsed in a dream, angles too sharp for the human mouth, curves too soft for the human hand. The marks crawled as if still being written by an invisible wrist. Adepts chased them with scalpels and cameras. The marks shifted to avoid focus. Some let the marks catch them instead. They pressed the blistered paint to their skin, tattoos by accident. The bodies that took the lines began to shed outward from the inscriptions, flakes of self lifting like old varnish. One man carved the shapes into his eyelids. He saw only fire until it ended. A servitor rolled through, wheels leaving blank tracks where the script refused to exist. Hours later, rust bloomed in those tracks, spelling a single character that bent the eye around it. The book, 9th attempt, transient script, semantic deviant, 7 succumbed by self-inscription. Margin. Instructions for leaving, maybe. None returned to confirm. 10th awakening. The answer. Chaplains chanted steady litanies in cadence. Their words came back to them half a beat late in their own voices, turned inside out. The answer mocked without laughing. It praised their effort while unmaking it. A deacon tore his tongue free to stop being told what he meant. Blood ran down the pages of the Lectio until the letters floated loose and sailed like red shrimp in a jar. Even tongueless, the echoes persisted in those voices, continuing the prayer in a better meter, lauding the new quiet. A novitiate fell to his knees, shaking, and put his head under a lectern as if shelter could be made by wood from whatever had learned his voice. The book, 10th attempt, countervox, organs excised, Echo persisted. Mechanicum note. This is not feedback. This is criticism. 11th awakening. The sleep. A hum started low in the ship's bones. It moved into men as if their bones were a continuation of the hull. Palpebrae sagged like curtains let down. Hammers fell in slow motion against rivets that leapt forward to meet them. Work proceeded through sleep, dream becoming workplace. In the dream's corridors lined up obediently, and everyone knew where everything was. When the hum ended, names had gone missing. Men looked at their hands as if those would tell them who they were. They could recite every deck designation, storage nook, cable run, vent aperture. They could not say their mother's names. A scribe with beautiful penmanship wrote his lost name on his own forearm, so he would not forget it again. When he woke from a later nap, the ink had crawled down his wrist and written itself neatly in the book on the line where such names were never supposed to appear. Then the letters dried to powder and blew away. The book, 11th attempt, somnolent resonance, personal names erased, spatial memory enhanced. Addendum. Keepers appointed to hold names for one another. Keepers losing their keep. 12th awakening. The wire. The scream came thin through every channel, as if stretched over knife edges. A woman's voice that belonged to no one aboard and to all grief at once. Adepts collapsed with hands to ears like children betrayed by a mother. The sound would not die until each channel was cut by hand, even those that existed only on paper and in minds that remembered the plan. A man ran from panel to panel with a hatchet, severing conduits as if killing a many-headed thing. In the chapel, one adept scrawled, "Forgive me," in his own blood, and vanished between kneelers, as if the space beneath had learned to be a doorway. The letters remained wet for 3 days. They reflected the faces of passers-by not as they were, but as they would be in 10 years. Several turned away from themselves and walked into bulkheads. The book, 12th attempt, prolonged keen. Choir absent. One missing, presumed translated. Beneath, forgiveness asked by the wrong voice. Hope died 12 times. The survivors learned to speak sideways. The word was not no, it was a name. The mouth refuses it. The ear too. The runes told me how to leave. I don't know what I left. The ship knew my brother's voice and asked me to sing it backward. We are fuel. The more we deny it, the cleaner we burn. A door opened in a place that was never a wall. The book of failures thickened with marginal hands. Mechanicum notes in crisp Binharic, ragged human whispers, neat chaplain letters, all layered into a palimpsest that hummed if you set your ear to it. Like a hive, like a heart, like a foundry. Men tore tongues, carved skin, starved in silence. Others slept standing and dreamed corridors into accuracy. The ship grew a memory comprised of theirs, edited by pain. 13th awakening. The theatre of breath. They dressed the cathedral as if for a wedding where both bride and groom were weapons. 12 circles were painted concentric on the deck in blood that did not want to dry. Each arc hosted a cluster of candles that burned green-black. Not flame, not flame. Incense hung in pillars. Acolytes coughed discreetly into sleeves and kept chanting. The seed phrase began in the lowest voice and climbed through throats until the highest register touched the edge of hearing and scratched there like a fingernail on glass. The first chorus made the deck swell and sink, the slow rise and fall of a giant's chest. The second made the stained glass weep colors that dripped with the tempo of a pulse into rivet heads, each drop an unblinking eye. The third pulled the stretched wire scream from the astropath's last memory, dragged it through skulls until it snapped with an audible twang that left a taste like old copper coins under every tongue. Men spat and saw their spit move toward the altar, as if gravity had turned around. On the fourth chorus, a bell tolled once, deep enough to ring the cartilage in ears and the small bones in ankles. No rope moved. Dust on rafters danced as if in rain. The chaplain stood at the nave's heart, Crozius raised. Smoke curled around the weapon and clung as if claiming it like ivy claims a tower. He did not brush it away. He spoke the names of hexagrammaton wings and the names of their old sins and the names that had been excised from later editions. The words fell into the circles and made ripples in the knot flame there. Adepts bled at the ears in symmetrical pairs. A censer burst into embers. Sparks drifted like dead stars and went out against skin without burning, leaving freckled constellations that matched no map and never faded. Iovan watched from the gallery with his slate pressed flat to his ribs, a shield made of names. He could feel the letters warm through cloth, as if embarrassed to be so near a birth. On the circle's outer edge, a servitor pivoted 90 degrees, then 90 more, as if aligning a compass that could not find north. Its lenses fogged from the inside. It stopped. The seed phrase reached the last turn, the one no one had said aloud since Caliban was still one piece, the one that completed a loop believed to be better left open. Voices trembled and steadied. Fear took a breath and left. The phrase cut off as if bitten. In the held absence, the ship decided. It began with a shiver so small you could pretend it was a draft. Then the shiver found the bones of the place. Stone, grafted to steel, gave a tiny private nod you would only hear if you had ever sworn anything you regretted and been forgiven anyway. A seam somewhere sighed and closed. A pump took a patient first stroke, as if it had been waiting for manners. Consoles lit in their own time, not all at once, not in parade order, but like morning in a city. Windows brightening here and there, then many, then enough. A voice came over private vox, iron filing itself into syllables. Azrael. You will remain aboard. A commander and chosen brothers are en route. When she is whole, her missions will be sent in cipher. None must know her purpose. The wrath of angels breathed. The breath could be felt in teeth and in the small of the back where fear keeps its keys. The breath could be seen in the way banner cloth lifted without draft and lay down again, obedient as hair after a hand. The breath could be heard in the gap between two beats that agreed to be one. Men did not cheer. They did not know how to greet a miracle that had tried to kill them 12 times. They bowed their heads as if before a casket and also before a cradle. The chaplain lowered his Crozius and felt it heavier, as if the ship had moved some of itself into it. Responsibility by specific gravity. He turned the weapon in his hand. Incense smoke threaded into the engraved cracks and would not leave. The book of failures lay open on its stand. Wax fell from a candle that had not burned in an hour and struck the blank line after 12th attempt. The drop should have flattened. Instead, it lifted into a letter that belonged to no alphabet, but sat there with authority. A figure made of curve and blade. No one could read it. Everyone understood it meant now. On the gallery, Iovan's slate shifted under his shirt. He clutched it through cloth, afraid the ship might learn the names he had hidden. Instead, he felt a pressure in his jaw, as if a hand were guiding his mouth to a shape of sound he would never be allowed to say. He mouthed it anyway and made no noise. The shape cooled on his palate like a coin. He swallowed. It stayed. Below, one adepta in green trim robes looked up and saw the rafters creak without moving. She lifted her stylus to record the phenomenon and found it shaking. She gripped it tighter. and the tremor passed into the page as a series of short, even lines that said nothing and told everything. The censer smoke released the Crusades and climbed to the clerestory like a living thing grown tired of floors. In the smoke, for one long breath, wings like plans unfolded and folded again. Not feathered, not metal, geometry learning to fly. They banked the knot flames. They closed the circles. They dismissed the choir and the dead. The wrath of angels did not sing a hymn. The wrath inhaled and held the breath and waited. Half miracle, half curse, whole ship. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 2, Scene 3, Awakening, Chapter 2. Scene 4 follows. Wrath of Angels, Chapter 2, Scene 4. Oaths in ash and blood, amid the debris of shattered Caliban. Month 1, year 260, the 41st millennium. When the ship at last drew breath, the inner circle decreed the final rite. Silence bound to blood, devotion written in absence. The new war host gathered beneath the cathedral vault, helms at their sides, veils across faces. Incense pooled in troughs at the deck seams, thick enough to sting eyes and line tongues. Candles burned in cast iron combs along the walls, and every flame held steady as if afraid to flicker without permission. They stood barefoot on ash lines drawn across the metal. The ash came from burned rosters, lists of the dead whose names could no longer be spoken. Each initiate pressed a hand into a chalice of warm blood, then closed the palm until clotting began. The sting was part of the oath. The chaplains moved among them with Crusades lowered, voices a monotone murmur. Not to glory, not to name, not to remembrance, to silence, to wrath, to erasure. Each phrase was repeated, but only in breath. No sound was permitted. Men felt their throats work, air passing, lips shaping, but silence held. A bell tolled once, no hand on rope, no clapper where a clapper should be. The sound rolled through the nave like breath leaving lungs. Above, in the clerestory, stained glass dimmed and brightened in a pulse that did not match any beating heart present. The book of failures waited on its stand like a coiled chain. The tests. They were brought forward one by one. A chaplain stood on the pulpit, another at the rail below. A third walked the line with a tablet etched in runes of subtraction. Each initiate knelt, and a Crusades head touched the crown of his skull with a careful weight that warned bone. Brother aspirant Caliban went early. The chaplain leaned close, breath like censer smoke. Your brother still lives. Speak his name and I will let you see him again. Caliban bit the inside of his cheek until salt filled his mouth. He tasted home and did not speak. The Crusades lifted from his head, leaving a circle of cold that would not warm for the rest of the day. The man after him was younger, the kind of strong that comes from work done out of love before it was taken for duty. The whisper came, "Your mother waits at the dock. One word and she will be brought aboard." His lips shaped a letter. He stopped himself with a tremor of the jaw that looked like prayer. The watching serfs in the gallery leaned forward as if wind pushed them. He kept still. He was marked with ash across the brow, a thin, dark finger that said, "Silence proven." A veteran with a scar like a dog's bite from ear to mouth got the cruelty reserved for the seasoned. Say your honor name. Say the one they gave you on the first world you burned clean. The man's eyes watered. His mouth twitched once, twice. A sound tried to exit and struck the back of his teeth like a bird against glass. He swallowed. He was past. Later he would confess to a steel post that he still tasted the letter he had almost let out. A lean brother with steady hands met the chaplain's eye when he should have looked down. Speak the thing you regret. He did not move. Speak the one you are proud of. He did not move. Speak the name of the God you trust most. His eyelids fluttered. He looked afraid for the first time that morning. He did not speak. Then the failure. A man with a broad back and gentle fingers, a former mason drafted into armor, trembled as the whisper reached him. Say your son's name. I will let you keep it. His jaw softened. His tongue moved. The name half formed, a vowel without consonant, a ghost of a sound. The Crusades fell in one sure arc. The body jerked, then obeyed the floor. Two servitors bore it away with tenderness that seemed learned from watching men carry the wounded. No one watched the path of the corpse. They watched instead the chaplain with the tablet. He placed the rune-etched slate against the dead man's brow and pressed until the edges bit. The rune's grooves drank blood and then dulled. In ledgers throughout the ship, the man's line paled from ink to grey to the colour of old paper. The surf scribes would find a space there that evening and shrug without meaning to. The bunkmate who had learned to dream with the man's snoring would sleep well for the first time in months and wake low sick for reasons he could not name. A photograph stored in a chest would show a gap where a person had been standing. The horizon behind was very clear. The tests continued. A chaplain whispered to a woman with a scar across her throat from an old blade, "Say the name of the first one you killed. Give it back to me, and you will be clean." She chewed blood and stood inside the silence the way a diver stands in pressure. She did not move. Another was tempted with rank, another with sleep, another with the permission to weep. The permission was the hardest. He almost took it. He swallowed noise like glass. A novitiate with nervous hands broke early under the softest question, "Do you want to go home?" He said yes before he knew he had spoken. There were no words allowed, but yes and no were worse than names. They made doors. The Crusades answered, and the subtraction tablet hummed, and by the time the body was moved, the echoes of his tiny word were gone. The Watcher. In the corner, a watcher stood cloaked in ragged black, much smaller than the armored forms around it, and heavier than any weapon. It did not move, but its gaze made distance a lie. Men gave the thing the space one gives a fall in a floor. It did not breathe. Air around it behaved as if considering how. One initiate stared too long into the hood's dark. He felt something unhook behind his eyes. He did not lose everything, only a piece so well chosen that he did not know where the ache came from. His brother's face dropped out of the map of his head, leaving a neat hole just big enough for regret. He sank to his knees and wept in silence at the shape absence makes. Another man, all nerve and muscle and old pride, decided he would not be cowed by a cloaked smallness. He kept his eyes on the Watcher as he took his place beneath the pulpit. He looked when he should have bowed. He thought, "It is only a robed thing." The Watcher angled its hood as if it had heard thought. Something like pressure accumulated in the man's teeth. His tongue went slack. He forgot the sounds of vowels. The chaplain did not even need to tempt him. He failed without being asked, and did not know what failure meant. A serf in the rafters, a tally clerk with ink on his fingers, and no business being where he was, watched the Watcher instead of the oath. Later he would swear the small hands came together inside the sleeves at a moment when no prayer was being offered. He would find his ledger number erased from the day's shift and be too embarrassed to ask how he had been paid. The Watcher's presence was a liturgy of its own. Where it looked, names loosened like leaves in the first frost. It was not malice. It was curation, the subtraction. Chaplains bore the duty of removal. They carried tablets etched with the calculus of forgetting and crosier that knew where skull meets vow. When a man faltered, a chaplain pressed the rune slate to his brow and spoke the answer to a question no one asked aloud. The slate warmed, then cooled. The man's name dissolved from the record where it had been written, but also from the places it had never been. Childhood walls, a first blade's pommel, a bench in a forgotten chapel. The subtraction made a gentle noise. Only those who had already forgotten could hear. One chaplain had a voice like gravel rolled in the surf. He did not write names. He wrote weights. This man removed, eased the ship by one memory. This woman removed, made space in the corridor of silence. At night he sat in the shadow of the altar and told his Crozius, "I carry more ghosts than bone." The metal did not answer, but the head of the weapon felt heavier, and he was grateful for the proof of burden. They made an office of the erasures. A lector read from a thin strip of vellum, "Who breaks the word?" The reply came, lips moving without sound. "We do not break. We are broken for purpose." The lector touched the tablet to the next brow. The weight of the oath thickened. The men who passed pressed their blackened palms. Blood turned to something like soot against the rail and left prints layered upon prints until the paint could not take more. The prints flaked off and drifted floorward like moths. One failure tried to run. He made it 3 steps before the ship's gravity took interest and increased beneath him by an honest fraction. He lay down without knowing why and was removed. The subtraction felt kind because it was precise. Omens of departure. As silence was bound into blood, the ship listened. The candles leaned in unison toward the nave, then, embarrassed, corrected themselves. Ash trails shifted against drafts that did not exist, curling into patterns too close to sigils to be chance. From somewhere in the hull came a series of 6 small knocks, like a hand learning to knock. The men pretended not to hear. Pretense is a form of piety when gods are watching. Above, the monastery stones groaned as if settling into a chair chosen long ago. Below, vault doors were sealed shut with chants and rivets. Relics were locked away. Cages were left open, expectant as mouths. Servitors daubed oil across hinges until it dripped like tears and caught the candlelight as small gold eyes. In a side chapel, an inexperienced acolyte struck flint to light a taper and made a spark that refused to land. It drifted instead to the wall and disappeared into iron as if in return. The acolyte closed his eyes and decided this was good fortune. He would later forget that he had ever lit anything. Eovan, the scaffold serf, watched from a high gantry with slate clutched flat to his ribs where he had hidden it for weeks. He had written names there he was not supposed to write. He had whispered them once into the crack behind a saint's broken face. Now he did not whisper. He scribbled a single line. "They are teaching us to be forgotten before we are dead." He wiped the line clean before anyone could see. A breeze that had no place to be came down the central aisle. It lifted the veils on the initiates' faces and set them down again as if trying them on. The breeze smelled of iron and old wax and a sweetness like pears that had never grown on any world they had known. No one commented. A chaplain plucked a thread of incense smoke between finger and thumb and tied it in a knot. The knot held the procession of the book. When the test ended and the last subtraction was made, 4 adepts in red took up chains and bore the book of failures in procession. The book was heavier than it had any reason to be. Names have weight when arranged to instruct. They did not look down. They did not meet anyone's eye. Their steps matched like a single gait. They set the book on the altar. The clasps trembled as if nervous at being watched, then shut with the sweetness of a tool seating well. Each clasp bore a small tooth. The teeth bit home and tasted blood on the leather and were pleased. The book's pages were warm to the hand and cool to the thought. That paradox is how such things announce themselves. A final blood rite. Each survivor pressed a palm to the altar stone and left a print that blackened instead of red. The chaplains intoned a line the book had grown to include, without anyone writing it there. The price is counted not in numbers, but in forgetting. A linen shroud was drawn over the book. The corners tucked themselves in with a fussy neatness that made men smile in spite of themselves, and then grow sober at having smiled during a thing like this. The last words that were not words. The chaplain at the pulpit lifted his crozius, and the nave stood straighter. He did not speak. Speaking would ruin the shape of the moment. He drew the weapon down so it cast a thin shadow across the deck, dividing light from light. He wrote an arc in the air. The men read it with their bones. They answered with the breath-only litany they had practiced until their chests ached. Who are you? We are those who are not named. What do you serve? We serve wrath that refuses applause. What will be remembered of you? The work, and not the workers. The watcher's hood tipped the smallest degree, as if acknowledging the proper answer to a child's question posed by a star. The departure. The void dock opened. This was not a door sliding. Doors surrender. This was stone and steel learning to be hinge, space pressed in sharp as glass. Stars spilled like nails shaken from a carpenter's apron. The air temperature dropped by a truth rather than a number. The wrath of angels slid forward on engines low, hull lights dead. She made no sound a man could claim with ears. She did not sing hymns. She did not announce herself. She displaced the dark, and the dark went on being dark, but with a new fact inside it. Below decks, pumps took their second and third strokes after centuries of patience. Bulkheads tested their own bolts with the soft creak of satisfaction. Somewhere inside the hull, sand turned to hourglass again. In the command cathedral, the banners lifted without draft and lay down obedient as hair after a hand. Candles that had burned perfectly steady all morning leaned, then corrected, then leaned to the opposite side like a congregation swaying to a silent choir. Men stood in the nave and felt the ship's breath fill their ribs. Some wept, not in joy or fear, but in the recognition of ownership. Ownership can be a sacrament. The chaplains did not bless the moment. Blessing is what you do to a thing that might change its mind. On the gantry, Iovan's slate shifted under his shirt. He pressed it flatter with a palm gone slick. He felt a shape form behind his teeth, not a word, not a vowel or consonant, but the outline of a recognition. He opened his mouth and found it could not be said. He closed his mouth and found it could be kept. A last bell tolled, not the cracked one in the cloister, nor any cast metal hung by human hand, but something deep and patient. The note passed through the welds into bones, and out the soles of feet into the deck, and out the hull into the wake the ship made, in the idea of night. A single line, breathed by many who would never admit to breath, silence above, wrath below. It was enough to begin. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 2, Scene 4. Oath in Ash and Blood, Chapter 3. Scene 1 follows.